How's it going, peeps? Yeah, I just want to say a few things today about the existence of cryptids in our English countryside and just give you my opinion of what I think is going on and how it could be that we could have so many large animals such as panthers and maybe even boggarts and other things, maybe dogmen, who knows, living in England when everybody thinks it's this tiny island full of people. You know, there's like 60 million people crammed into 60 million acres. People don't think it's possible, but if you look at the map, first thing you'll notice is that Britain isn't a tiny island at all. It's a huge island. In fact, it's the biggest island in the Atlantic. Yes, there's 60 million people, but those people are concentrated in the cities. Britain is a green, mostly rural landscape, full of streams, rivers, hills, and forests. Another thing to consider is that human beings, they're very predictable. They get up at a certain time every day and go to the same place to do their work, and then they clock off at a certain time. Here's some examples of people secretly living in other people's apartments and houses, totally undetected for a considerable amount of time. People living in their attic. I think this one in Japan, the living in the walls of my house. They live in cupboards. There's lots of examples of it. And the reason they're able to get away with it is because people are predictable. They have to go to work at a certain time. They have a kind of mechanical existence. And just like a farmer can time the planting and the harvest of his crops because the seasons are predictable, so can cryptids, or any kind of animal really, predict the movements and the activities of human beings in order to avoid them. So these people were living in someone else's house. They would hide in a cupboard or in the attic, and then when that person went out to work, they could emerge from their attic or their cupboard, go to the fridge, get some food, use the bathroom, watch the TV, and they knew that that person wouldn't be back until a certain time, and they would have the run of the place. And any animal that could, for instance, see in the dark would have the whole world to themselves, pretty much, because people can't see in the dark, and anywhere that's outside of the range of the streetlights, let's say, for instance, the fields in the countryside, the forests and the mountains, and the national parks, they would be able to carry on all night long without bumping into anybody. Let me give an example of how large-bodied animals can be right in your vicinity and you wouldn't even know it. I was driving down this road today, which is just a few hundred meters from where I've got my caravan, and a wild hog leaped out of the hedge on the right-hand side, dashed across the road and jumped into the hedge and disappeared on the left-hand side. I'd never seen a wild hog before, and certainly there are not supposed to be any in this part of the country. Wild boar became extinct in the UK in the 17th century. There are thought to be between 500 and 1,000 animals in the UK currently. The biggest populations are in Kent, East Sussex, and the Forest of Dean in Gloucestershire, with others in Devon, Bedfordshire, Dorset, and Scotland, so nowhere near the West Midlands where I live. And yet I saw one, and he looked like that one there, kind of smallish. Another example is deer. Yes, there are deer all over the country, and plenty in the West Midlands, but in the particular area where I'm staying at the moment, you ask any of the local residents if there's deer, they'll say there aren't any. And yet I know for a fact there's a big herd of deer, and they come into the paddock early in the morning, and I've seen them in the forest, and the tracks are all up the road, in the edge of the road where there's a bit of mud and stuff, you can see the tracks. But if you ask the two neighbors who go out occasionally with their shotguns shooting pigeons, they'll say there's no deer. So we've got deer, we've got wild hogs, and yet if you ask any of the locals, they'll say there aren't any. It's totally impossible. Now, even more than that, I haven't seen a boggart here. I haven't actually seen the boggart. But strange howling noises have been heard in the middle of the night, very close to the house, just outside the window, that sounded like they came from a big creature with a big lung capacity, like a combination of a howl and a growl. Nobody can account for what made the sounds. It's not like any known animal. So that needs explaining. Things have gone missing. There's been weird events. For instance, we had a sledgehammer just leaning up outside the shed. Been there for years. That's where we always kept it. But one day I went to look for it and it wasn't there. And I looked and I looked and I couldn't find it. It had gone missing. Funny thing for someone to steal a sledgehammer. I could not find that damn sledgehammer anywhere. Well, about 6 months after it disappeared, it turned up. You know where it turned up? Somebody or something had thrown it through the side of the polytunnel, and it was inside the polytunnel. Now that polytunnel is not one of these cheap polythene ones. This is a really tough woven plastic fabric, okay? Very, very superior, tough material. If you or I or a normal human being tried to throw a sledgehammer, which is a blunt object, with enough force to pierce the fabric and travel inside to the center of the polytunnel, you wouldn't succeed. It would just bounce off. So whoever or whatever did it had a supernatural level of strength, a hideous strength, far in excess of anything a human being would have been able to muster, especially in the pitch black of night, in the middle of the countryside. Who's going to do that? Why somebody would steal the sledgehammer and then 6 months later bring it back and throw it into the polytunnel? You tell me. I don't believe that was a human being doing all that. I think it was probably the same thing that was howling by the side of the road that night and scared the local residents. There's a little wooded area just at the bottom of the field where I'm living, and there's a little entrance with a broken stick across it, and there's another little entrance further along. And if you go inside, you can see it's all trampled down, and somebody has been in there, or something has been in there, amusing themselves, positioning these sticks in the usual way. There's an arch, nothing very defined, no teepees, but if you know what to look for, you will find signs of Sasquatch, the woodwuss. So this is a tiny little border of trees between a field and a waterworks. And yet somebody has been in here laying sticks against a tree like that. And there's signs all around the area if you know where to look. Further along the brook, all around. This is just one tiny example. There's also a cave. I mean, I had no idea we had a cave around here. There's a cave in the next field, and it's all surrounded by brambles and a big thicket all around it. But if you go inside, there's a pretty big cave. So could there be a boggart here? It's not children coming out and making those structures. I would know, because I'm actually on site. I'm on safari right here. And many other strange things happen. I mean, I've seen lots of UFOs around here. This is sort of UFO hotspot. There was an incident recently. Looked like a star, but a very large one appeared to land in a nearby field. It looked like it was a falling star, and it went into the field. 20 minutes later, 2 Apache helicopters were circling that field for about half an hour. These things happen, but you have to be on the ground, you have to be there. Final story I want to tell you is regarding official recognition of Bigfoot by the scientific establishment, the professional scientists. This guy, Grover Krantz, professional scientist at a university, he believed in Bigfoot, and yet he had never seen one. And why would that be? No research council is going to provide the funding to pay for a guy like this to go out and spend years and years in the bush looking for Bigfoot. He's got his little skull collection, and he likes to sit there behind his desk. He's never seen a Bigfoot. So everybody gets excited when this Grover Krantz says that he supports the idea that there may be a Bigfoot. Why should you care what this bookworm thinks? There is no substitute for field work, actual primary data. Years ago, when I was a professional scientist myself, I went on an expedition to Ecuador, to the western lowland rainforest here, this area here. It's not as well known to science as the eastern side of the Andes, the Amazon here, which gets all the fame and the glory. So I went there and I did a primate expedition, and I was looking for howler monkeys, and I wanted to, count the number of howler monkeys there were in this reserve. And there were not supposed to be any other monkeys apart from howler monkeys in that forest. But the first day I went out into the field, into the woods, to have a look for the howler monkeys, I saw a troop of capuchin monkeys, and they were not supposed to be there. Supposedly at one time they reckon it had been part of their range, but they'd never been seen there by scientists, so they were not officially meant to be there, and yet we saw them, and we reported it when we got back to the field station to the local people that were working there, and they'd never seen them either. And then after a week or so of intense field work, a couple of members of my team saw a dark brown puma crossing the trail. It crossed after I'd gone. It must have been in the bushes waiting for me to go past. So we looked it up in the book, and there was supposedly no pumas known in that part of the jungle. And we asked all the locals if they'd ever seen a puma. One guy we spoke to had seen what he called a tigre, but we never managed to find out exactly what he was talking about, because I looked it up and I couldn't find any reference to tigres, as a name for a jaguar or a puma. And he didn't give us a very clear description. Some of the people get a bit nervous when you start asking too many questions. They're very worried about government spies apparently in that part of the world. So we didn't really get much from him. But the puma was not on the list of known, officially recognized species in that particular forest. According to what my colleagues saw, according to their description of it, it had a chocolate, dark brown coloured fur. And I cannot find any reference anywhere to pumas with that coloration. The only thing I could find with that color fur and that sort of shape to it is the jaguarundi. But the jaguarundi is too small. It's only a bit bigger than a house cat, domestic cat. And the thing they saw was the size of a lion. So what it was, well, they said it was a puma. They were convinced it was a puma. They said it was enormous. So just because something is not officially recognized and it's not known to the scientists doesn't really mean that it's not there or it can't be there. It just means that a scientist has not either observed it or got solid proof of its existence. I mean, they need a type specimen. They need at least a photograph or something really solid, because scientists aren't even going to necessarily be able to take another scientist's word for it, let alone a civilian, somebody who's not credentialed. So they always err on the side of caution when it comes to acknowledging things like the existence of cryptids or any kind of species. Anyway, thank you for your time, and watch out for wild hogs if you're out in the English countryside. Apparently they can be quite vicious at times if you catch them in a bad mood. All right, I'll see you next time. Thanks a lot. Bye bye.